What's going on, everyone? My name is Under the Radar, and welcome back to the Draft League Viabilities. Kind of. um, so, in this video, I'm going to be talking about hazard removal and the way that I feel about it. Because I've gotten many comments in my time on YouTube about the way that I look at hazard removal, the way that I feel about hazards in general, and the way that I look at a bunch of different things that have to do with the game. And I figured that if I told you guys why I feel the way I feel about hazard removal, you guys will potentially start to incorporate it into hold on, this is really loud, I think. I'm still trying to get used to the new mic settings and everything. But either way, I'm hoping that you guys will start to incorporate it into your own draft leagues, and that will then carry over. I'm going to do one quick thing. I'm going to do just a little bit. There we go. We'll do... There we go. Now I'm a little bit louder for you guys. So I kind of sort of wanted to talk first off about why I feel as though hazard removal is not essential in draft league format. In my time of playing draft league format, I have never drafted a team that is extremely weak to hazards aside from WBE. This season of WBE, my team is extremely weak to hazards, and I understand that, and I'm going to talk about that. Like, I made transfers to try to fix that. But basically, I don't have a grounded poison type. I have a single defogger. My sweepers are all grounded. And on top of that, I don't have many just hazard resists. Like, for example, I don't have many rock resists. And that makes it really, really difficult for my team to function against hazard stack. So, as I mentioned, there are a few things to consider whenever looking at whether or not your team is weak to hazards. And I'm going to show this off with a couple of the teams that I've drafted in the past. These, in my opinion, are some of my most successful teams. I've made playoffs with every single one of them. I've won championships with some of them. I've done very, very well with all of these teams, and I think that really helps with I think it helps with the standard that I have of whether or not hazard removal is good against a team. So, as I said, whenever you're looking at hazard removal and whether or not your team needs it, you need to look at what your big mons are, like your sweepers, and whether or not they're weak to hazards. If they are super weak to hazards, like they're susceptible to toxic spikes, or they're they're all grounded or something along those lines, then that's something to keep in mind. Let's go ahead and we'll take a look at my ICBA team right now. This is a team that I'm currently undefeated with. People have not brought hazard stack versus me a single time. I had one person bring spikes, but that's it. And so what I mean by having a team that's not very weak to hazards, if you look across my team, toxic spikes are shit. They don't affect Clefable, Lando, Megalotti, Lucario, Scolipede, Rotom Heat, Sigilyph, Skuntank, or Steelix. That means toxic spikes are literally only good against let me turn this. I really need to figure out like the audio levels for this and figure stuff out. Either way, that means that hazard stack, like toxic spikes, are only good versus Porygon 2 and versus Jellicent. So why would somebody bring toxic spikes if there's a chance that I might not even bring Jellicent? Spikes also are not very good versus me because they don't affect Clefable, Lando, Megalotti, Rotom Heat, Sigilyph. Like, it's very difficult for spikes to do a lot of damage versus me, depending on what I bring. So because of that, hazard stack just isn't that good versus me. And whenever I'm looking at hazard stack, I'm looking primarily at spikes and toxic spikes, because typically a team is going to bring stealth rocks no matter what. They're the best hazard in the game. They have type effectiveness. They can do up to 50% to a Pokemon. They hit Pokemon no matter whether they're levitating or whether they're grounded, and it's just super easy to set them up turn one and not have to worry about hazards for the rest of the game. So because of that, whenever I look at hazard stack, I look specifically at spikes and toxic spikes. So I've come to understand that I'm gonna have to play with rocks on my side of the field every single game. So I'd rather get rocks up on my opponent's side of the field and just deal with it. So that's kind of like the way I'm looking at things. And if you look at a lot of the teams that I've drafted, you're going to see that like either getting up hazards can help some of my Pokemon, or they don't affect the vast majority of my Pokemon. So let's take a look at another team and I'll explain it that way. Lando T, again, not affected by spikes or toxic spikes. Celebi has natural cure, so it's not affected by toxic spikes. Ribombee and Alolan Persian are both susceptible to spikes and toxic spikes. Golbat doesn't get hit by either. Ursaring has Guts and Quick Feet, meaning that if you set up a layer of toxic spikes, you could just be helping out my Ursaring. Heracross, it's give and take. Like, I've ran like Facade on Mega Heracross, assuming that I was going to get burnt or toxic or something. So that I understand, but like ultimately, like I have 4 Mons so far that don't really care. Another one that doesn't care because it's levitating, so it doesn't get hit by spikes or toxic spikes. And then Stakataka is also not hit by toxic spikes. So this team is a little bit weaker than my ICBA team, but it's not super weak. And if you notice, I only have Golbat and Lando and Thundy for hazard removal, and I brought Defog on Lando maybe twice. So I don't really think that hazard removal is good against this. And then another really good example is this APA Academy team that I drafted that I went 3-1 with before I left to go to APA main. So like this one, it's a little bit more susceptible to spikes. I will give it that because like Tapu Koko, Muck, Gengar, Ferrothorn, like I only have a couple immunities, and I think it's Hawlucha, Mesprit, and Pelipper. But everything else gets hit by spikes. But I have 2 grounded poison types, meaning that I don't have to worry about toxic spikes being on my side of the field for too long because they will always get absorbed if I'm in for a little bit. So like if I'm switching around, and I have an immunity to toxic spikes in Ferrothorn and Mesprit and Pelipper, so it's super easy for me to get rid of toxic spikes with this team, so I don't have to worry about that. This is like one of my favorite teams that I ever had. This I made to, I think, semis in NPA, but like people aren't going to bring toxic spikes or spikes against a Skarmory because it's so easy to defog. They're not going to bring toxic spikes against a Nidoqueen because it's a grounded poison type that can absorb it super easily. So this is a team that, aside from these 2 Pokemon, it is pretty freaking weak to toxic spikes plus spikes. However, I have 2 very good deterrents, and I think later on in the season I picked up Xatu for something. I think that might have been a P4G team, might have been an MPA team. I'm not 100% positive, but I know for a fact that like you're not going to want to set up hazards against these 2. So like that makes my hazards not a big deal versus this team. This team is also pretty weak to hazards. However, the big one that I was worried about most with this team was toxic spikes because of Mega Medicham being a really big threat, Linoon being a really big threat, and Darmanitan being a big threat. So in order to make it to where I wasn't super weak to toxic spikes, I have a Defogger, a Natural Cure Mon, a Mon that doesn't care about spikes or toxic spikes, a Grounded Poison, a Levitator, another Grounded Poison, and a Steel-type Defogger that is on the ground that doesn't care about toxic spikes. So those Pokemon made it to where toxic spikes aren't a big deal. So because of that, I don't have to worry about hazard stack, and therefore making hazard removal less necessary. And you're going to see that it's very common in everything that I do. This was my P4G Season 1 team, which I also won a championship with. Again, immune to toxic spikes, immune to both, absorbs toxic spikes, spins, immune to both. So the only thing that they'd be really good against is like Suicune, Hitmontop, Tyrantrum, Mega Houndoom, but it would be like, let's say I didn't bring them at all and you still wanted to set them up, you could be losing a lot of momentum just because I'm bringing something that doesn't care about them at all, or you could waste a lot of turns setting up toxic spikes just for me to drop in my grounded poison type and get rid of them. 2 more teams that I wanted to look at to kind of sort of explain it. This is the best rain team that has ever been drafted, and I will stick by that, and I will firmly say that I drafted this team damn near perfectly. Sorry guys, my throat's starting to hurt a little bit. So again, not affected by toxic spikes, immune to both, absorbs them, natural cure, a Defogger that does not get hit by either one of them, and then another Guts Pokemon. So like I do have like, this is susceptible, this, and this, but Toxic Spikes, as I said, I can absorb them, and if somebody wants to set them up, I have 2 really good Heal Bell users. So as long as I'm drafting Deterrent for Hazard Stack, I don't need to worry about Defog. And then the last one that I want to look at, this is actually PGL Season 4. This is actually the league I met Mewtwo fan Nate in. And this one is definitely the weakest team that I have to Hazard Stack that I've ever drafted. It was like Jirachi, I've said it like 3 times, it's been on this list 3 times. This is also immune to both. This is immune to both. This is immune to both and can defog them, and I don't have a grounded poison type. So this one is the weakest. So this one, I could see somebody being like, okay, I can bring Hazard Stack and get off a good bit of damage on the Victini, the Darkrai, the Hitmonchan, the Mega Bayonet, things of that nature. And it could be a little bit more problematic. However, in every single one of these teams, you've seen a very consistent theme and a very consistent aspect that I wanted to draft to prevent hazard removal from, or hazard stack from being prevalent. You've seen super good offensive Pokemon that don't get whittled down by spikes and toxic spikes. You've seen walls that don't care about spikes and toxic spikes. And you've seen like just general deterrent. Something that hasn't been on here that I've used multiple times is Xatu. I've used Xatu multiple times because it's a magic bounce user that just permanently makes people not want to go for stealth rocks or spikes or toxic spikes because they don't want them on their side of the field. So because I've drafted like this so much, I've become accustomed to not having to play hazard stack. I've become used to having my opponents be like, okay, hazard stack isn't that good. Hazard stack isn't that useful versus this opponent. So because of that, in my opinion, hazard removal is not essential for literally anything. However, let's take a look at my WBE team. This team is super weak to hazards. I have 1 Defogger that is on the ground. All of my offensive threats are grounded. Zygarde, Xurkitree, Superior, Darmanitan are all grounded, so they will all get hit by toxic spikes. They will all get hit by spikes. My 1 Defogger doesn't really want to run Defog, and my only immunity to both spikes and toxic spikes is a Mesprit. Aggron still gets hit by regular spikes. So this is an example of a team that needs hazard removal. I don't know why I'm still getting that notification. This is a team that needs good hazard support. This team could really benefit from a Xatu. This team, spoiler alert for the WBE, could really benefit from a Mega Sableye because it just is a Pokemon that will deter people from even wanting to bring hazard stack, and you just build those magic bounce users to always take on the hazard setters of the opponent. And that is kind of sort of why I look at hazard removal the way I do, and why I feel that it's not super useful. A lot of people think that hazard removal is extremely necessary and they bring it to every single game. I feel like that's a little bit overkill. If your team consists of a Nidoqueen, a Lando T, a Lottie, a Lucario, you don't need that. Your offensive Pokemon don't really care about toxic spikes or spikes. So why do you need to bring hazard removal? Your opponent is going to fight to get up rocks and keep up rocks. Almost every single game, they're going to make sure that their stealth rocks stay on their field. And I think that whenever you're fighting to keep rocks off of your side of the field, it's a game that you lose so much momentum in. Because, so let's say I'm running an offensive Volt Turn team, and I've Volt switched and I pivoted and I've gotten into a phenomenal position, but then I'm like, crap, I can only switch on stealth rocks 2 more times. Let me defog them away. Okay, that's now getting rid of my rocks and your rocks and every single bit of the momentum that has been built up in that game to potentially power through your opponent and power through and win you the game. You lose like that. you literally lose it in the snap of your fingers, because your opponent can go for a Dragon Dance, a Calm Mind, an Iron Defense, a U-turn to get in one of their big setup sweepers to deter you from ever winning the game. And you have to pray that whenever you click Defog or Rapid Spin, that your opponent doesn't try to capitalize on that, and that you can gain all of that momentum back. I think that that is a super, super, super important thing to realize whenever you are bringing hazard removal. Hazard removal can help you, but it can also lose you the game by getting rid of the hazards too late in the game. You guys have seen from the way that I play, I typically bring a cleaner, I try to get everything in range of that cleaner, and I like to spam a single move at the end of the game to win. It's what I've, like, this team right here, no, not this team, this team taught me that it is one of the easiest things to do. With Rain, something that can outspeed everything, something that can nuke everything, it is super, super easy to just sweep with a single Pokemon. So by getting rid of hazards on your opponent's side with Defog can really hurt that. And I think that if people drafted more in the way I drafted, and keep in mind, I'm not saying that I'm the best drafter in the world or that the way that I draft is perfect and everybody should do it. What I am saying is that I've found a method to draft certain Pokemon that are not susceptible to hazard stack, meaning that I don't believe hazard removal is super, super necessary. My WBE team doesn't reflect that, but a lot of these other teams that I've had that have taken me to playoffs, that have taken me to championships, that have won me championships, definitely show that. And if you guys are in a draft league, try drafting like this. Try drafting offensive Pokemon and bulky Pokemon that are not susceptible to hazard stack, and see how often your opponents bring it. Because if you draft like a Lando T, Clefable, Lottie, your opponent will probably never bring hazard stack versus you, as long as you don't have like a bunch of Pokemon that are super weak to it and you have a grounded poison. That means that you found a way that maybe people like that you don't need hazard removal as much. You don't need to bring defog on obscure Pokemon. You don't need to draft a low tier defogger to fill that defogger role if your opponent isn't bringing the hazard stack. And then that can even free up a draft slot. So it definitely has its pros and it definitely has its cons. But I think that if you guys just try it, you will see that it definitely has more pros than cons. But with that, guys, I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, please make sure to leave a like down below for me, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.